be here with you this evening. I consider it a great providence. You know, the Lord always directs our paths, and sometimes we make plans, and He makes other plans for us. We came across the border. How many enjoy coming across the border? No? Yeah. Previously, a year ago, I came across the border, and I spent like an hour and a half while they took me aside in a room and questioned me and went through all of my stuff. And so we had a bit of apprehension this time coming up to the border, but other than a few gruff words and taking away all our apples, everybody's nodding their head yes, the apples. We came across, and well, it was about lunchtime, so we pulled over in a little town and ate our lunch, and we thought, well, we'll take a walk after lunch. And so we walked around a little town there, and then we saw a supermarket. We thought, hey, we'll get some apples. So we went in and picked out some apples and came to the register and tried to use our card, and our card wouldn't work. Oh, no. Our card won't work in Canada. What are we going to do now? We got to drive another 5 hours. That's going to take some gas. And well, so we went to our truck, and we hurriedly got on the phone. My wife called the card company, and I called the bank, and I called the bank 1 minute before they closed. They said, oh, you're in Canada. You should have told us ahead of time. We'll fix that. Do you want us to fix both cards? Yeah. Okay. 1 minute. We'd been 1 minute later, we wouldn't have got our cards turned on. Went to the gas station and got gas, and they worked. So praise the Lord. So that's providence, right? 1 minute? Is that providence? Yeah, that's providence. Okay, well, you're here to hear about cancer, not about providences, right? But if you ever get a cancer diagnosis, that's when you really want providence, isn't it? So a lot of our talk tonight is about how to avoid getting the cancer diagnosis. We won't be talking a lot about treatment, that's for sure. Although I'll tell you a little bit about my background as we go along here. Cancer is their hope. I was watching a baker make a cake. Whoa, what's a doctor going into a baker's place to watch him make a cake? Well, this was my partner at the hospital. He was also a doctor at the hospital, and he had put together a bakery to give his son a business to financially support himself. And he was going to make carrot cake. And he invited me to come watch him make carrot cake. And I thought, well, that'll be interesting. Obviously, you know, it's got carrots, so it's got to be healthy, right? Doesn't that kind of give you the idea? Yeah, carrot cake. So I'm thinking this is going to be healthy. So I'm watching him, and he had this big, 60-liter mixing bowl and his, 4-liter scoops. And he took a scoop of oil, and he put it in the mixing bowl. Then he took a scoop of sugar, and he put it in the mixing bowl. And then he put a scoop of eggs, a whole, 4 liters. And then he took and put a scoop of flour in. I'm thinking, this is probably going to be the first of many scoops of flour. No, that was it. I'm thinking, I was shocked. Wait, is this mostly other things other than flour? Well, then in went some nuts and a little bit of carrots and all kinds of things and baking soda. And then he put that into the oven. Once he got that in the oven, then he needed to make his cream cheese frosting. Oh boy, something to melt in your mouth and be, feel really smooth on your tongue. And he'd gone down to somewhere in South America to secure the best vanilla he could find. He was into his desserts, I can tell you. He was able to produce a lot of interesting exotic desserts. And so he made his cream cheese frosting. And, well, so I had an awakening. This isn't very healthy. Well, a year or 2, 3 years later, I was going through that area once I'd started going on the road and teaching people about health. I'd quit my practice and given up the practice at the hospital. And I was looking through the newspaper where I had practiced, just to see what was going on because I was back in the area. And here was his picture in the newspaper. I'm thinking, why is this picture in here? Oh, honoring Dr. So-and-so. Well, what are they honoring him for? He passed away. I didn't know he was sick. I didn't know, why did he pass away? And so I found one of the other doctors wandering around town at the supermarket, and I said, well, what happened to Dr. So-and-so? Why is his obituary in the newspaper? He says, well, he died of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And he always thought he was going to be healthy, so he didn't really have much of his own health insurance. And he did all the heroic things to try to save himself from dying of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, so he about bankrupted the whole family and died. Like, wow, shocking. But as I've studied, there was everything in that cake that would give you all the fuel you needed to die of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. As you'll see as we go along here, sugar wipes out your immune system. The cream cheese is going to have not only the animal fat, but all the different viruses that can cause non-Hodgkin lymphoma. I mean, it's like interesting. How we treat our bodies is how we will end up living or dying. And so, cancer has surpassed heart disease as the #1 cause of death, at least in most societies. Back in the year 1900, only 5% of death certificates listed cancers even on the list of diseases the patient might have had. Now we have a lot more cancer. Everybody, how many know somebody that's got cancer? Yeah, and we're always praying for them. Well, how have we come so far? A disease that was nearly unheard of in the year 1900, and now it tops the list. Something's changed. And if it doesn't change in our lives, it might be a very real reality for us. So we have to make sure we understand what causes this and what we can do to keep from getting it. Now, my experience with cancer came when I took a call to be the medical director at Eden Valley Lifestyle Center in Loveland, Colorado, where they see mostly cancer patients and treat them with natural remedies. During that time, I spent a lot of time researching, because for me, as a researcher, I like to make sure we have medical evidence for everything we do. And so I would be asking lots of questions. Well, why do we do fever treatments? And how long should we do them for? And what temperature are we trying to reach? And what happens if we don't reach that temperature? And, all these treatment questions. Very interesting experience. Anyway, so our goal is to better understand lifestyle factors that lead to cancer and how best to cancer-proof yourself. So you don't have to be at a treatment center asking those questions. So we'll talk about diet, we'll talk about lifestyle, we'll talk about toxins, we'll talk about the mind-body connection. Because there's a lot to that. What you think affects how your health is. So I'm going to start with one of the most important causes of cancer, and that is, well, meat, really. And so if we look at the statistics, red meat and dairy products double your risk of dying of prostate cancer, metastatic prostate cancer. And why is that? Well, I'll go into several different reasons why that is. Several different reasons. One by one, and sort of the mechanism. So you get an idea. So you really understand why this isn't just a conjecture or epidemiology. This has got good mechanisms as well. So one of the reasons why meat is such a problem is the high protein diets. People who go on high protein diets don't do themselves a lot of favors. Protein tends to fuel cancer for some reason, especially pushing it. So here, if you're on a low protein diet, you have a nominal risk of, in this case, lung and liver cancer. But if you go on a high protein diet, which is the dark bar graphs there, you more than double your risk of cancer, especially cancer that is growing and spreading. So how many have heard of, the South Beach diet, the paleo diet, the low carb diet? I mean, it might make people lose weight, but guess what? Cancer patients lose weight too. Yeah, so this is not where you want to go for weight loss during And I like to throw in a few slides of things that help, though. Here's tomatoes. Protect you against cancers of the mouth, esophagus, stomach, colon, rectum, and prostate. Maybe you're thinking, wait a minute, what's that got to do with protein? It's very interesting. People wonder where they're going to get their protein, and they worry about their protein, and they fuss about their protein. This all came after World War I when we had ability to make lots of protein for the war effort, and then the war effort stopped, and all these industries were still sitting there with turkeys and beef and everything on their hands, and they said, what are we going to do with it? Sell it to the public. So they put charts on schoolroom walls, the 4 food groups, 2 of which were animal protein, dairy and meat. And then, you know, it was a sales job, not science at all. But what's with the tomatoes? Well, if you look at protein the way the nutritionists look at it, which is to take 100 calories of a certain food and then see what percent in the way of calories the food is in protein, beef is about 17% protein. Out of 100 calories, 17 would be protein. Guess what percent tomatoes is? 16%. So for 100 calories of tomatoes, you get 16 calories of protein. It's hard to avoid protein. Broccoli would be 22. So, I mean, stinging nettle, if you cooked it up like spinach, it'd be 40. So you get, you know, where do you think the cow got its protein? Now that brings up an important point. That is, animal protein is not the same as vegetable protein. You think, how can that be? Isn't protein protein? No, proteins are very, very different. There's 20 some odd amino acids that make up a protein. You can have a whole different set of amino acids in one protein than another. And so beef has a lot more methionine and cysteine, and whereas your vegetable proteins have a lot less of it. And so when you get the mix of amino acids that makes a vegetable protein, it lowers cancer risk, whereas meat, with its mix of amino acids that makes up its protein, it increases the cancer risk. It's a bit of an interesting thing to figure out what's in your protein. Now, fat. So we've said protein so far. Now let's talk about fat. And you know, broccoli doesn't have much fat. So if you're on a high-fat diet, it's probably not mostly broccoli. It's probably mostly animal products. On this slide, we'll look at the risk of dying of breast cancer based on how much fat you eat in your diet. And so this is a graph here. If we put all the countries on the line, you notice that the United States and Canada are way up here at the top. And that's because we get a lot of our protein, a lot of our fat, a lot of our animal products in our diet. And we end up with a high fat intake, say 180 grams per day. And notice we have a very high death rate from breast cancer. On the other end of the scale, we have Japan and Thailand. And notice the Japanese, they're way down here, low fat intake, low death rate from breast cancer. But you know, those Japanese, they moved to Vancouver, they moved to LA, they start eating at the fast food joints, they eat all the same fat that the locals eat. In a couple generations, they have just as high a death rate from breast cancer as anybody else. And so, high-fat diet contributes to the risk of cancer for a number of reasons. I mean, it's, and I'll just say, if anything affects breast cancer, it'll affect prostate cancer pretty much too. So you can just say, well, if it's increasing, these are all hormonally sensitive cancers. They're all going to be a part of, you know, the same milieu, same mix. Saturated fat triples your risk of dying of prostate cancer. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, but I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat all those animal fats. Well, processed oils, bottled oils, you know, your common vegetable oils. No different, really. I mean, doesn't have some of the hormones with it and not as much saturated fat, but processed vegetable oils quadruple, 4 times your risk of breast and stomach cancer. And pancreatic cancer goes up a lot too with these bottled oils. I've just completed an article on oils, and it's off at my proofreaders, when it gets done, I'll be posting it on my website. But bottled oils, I mean, just to give you an insight, from 1909 to 1999, North America has increased the amount of bottled oils they use by 1,000-fold. I mean, you go to the supermarket and there's a whole shelf lined with all the different kind of oils you can buy, and it hasn't done us any good. It's sort of consumer driven, but people love the flavor. So what happens is anytime you increase fats in your body, all the hormones get more active because hormones are based on fat. And you increase the fat, and so the hormones now have a, as it were, a fat slick to ride on, and they get more active. And so any of those hormones are more likely to cause trouble. And hormones increase the risk of cancer. For example, oral contraceptives and hormone replacement therapy increase cancers, the breast, endometrium, and ovaries. And so fats increase the effect of hormones. What's more, fat makes people gain weight. And every fat cell is not just there for padding, it has functions. One of its functions is that it makes hormones. It creates more hormones. It puts off more hormones. And so if a woman is overweight and she gets breast cancer, we have a hard time stopping the contribution of the hormones from the fat to her breast cancer, and she has a much poorer prognosis, much more likely to die of the cancer. So obesity plays into the factor as well. Now let's talk about hormones. One of the big hormones that's important for women is estradiol. It helps make little girls into mothers, give her secondary sexual characteristics. And so you like to have those at a certain time in life, but not when you're postmenopausal, for sure, or later on in life. Now this chart here illustrates the effects of estradiol. First of all, I have a picture there of a woman up against a bar graft. And a woman has about 4 quarts of blood, or 4 liters. And in those 4 liters of blood, if she has more than 9 units of estradiol, her risk of breast cancer goes really high. Well, where would she get more estradiol? If she eats a chunk of cheese, here I have pictured as being 100 grams, she adds 3 more units of estradiol. If she's already at the limit and adds 3 more units, I mean, that's 30%, 40% higher. That's a lot of trouble. A pat of butter, 50 grams. You're looking at 4 units of estradiol. Lots of hormones in these animal products. European beef steak, 4.3. And now around the year 2000, 2001, there was a lot of discussion between Europe and the United States over whether the Europeans would accept American beef in Europe. And they said, no, we don't want your beef here. Why not? Well, a lot of research came out to highlight why they didn't want American beef. And it has to do with the fact that American beef had 5 times as much hormones as European beef. Why is that? Well, in America, they discovered you could get 20% more cow in the same amount of feed if you gave them a bunch of hormones. So they usually give them a cocktail of 3 different hormones. One's estradiol, but the other 2 are synthetic ones that are really wild. So if the woman eats a beefsteak from America, she just tripled the amount of estradiol in her body, and the risk of breast cancer goes 7-fold or higher. Notice skim milk, 18. Eggs, 2 of them, 13. Now, when I first started practicing medicine, I first started in Iowa in the United States. I was the vegetarian in Iowa. I mean, that's where they raised lots of pigs and turkeys. And in our town where I was practicing, they had a hog slaughter plant that slaughtered 14,000 hogs a day. I mean, there was trucks coming from Canada, from Nebraska, from Ohio, everywhere just to feed that plant. But that's a lot of hogs. And one day a patient came in from there. I saw a lot of patients from hog slaughter plants. And this patient came in, and I asked him, well, what part of the plant do you work in so I understand your physical demands, why you got hurt? He says, well, I work in rendering. Well, that's usually for dead animals. In fact, my secretary's husband was the HR director for a rendering plant down the road. And so I asked the patient, I said, so why do you need rendering? Aren't all your hogs coming in alive? He says, well, you can't make the entire hog into a pork chop. I said, well, what part of the hog do you get? Well, we get the bones, and we get the guts, and we get the blood. I said, oh, that's a lot of blood. He says, yeah. I said, what do you do with all that blood? He says, well, we sell it to the chicken farmer down the road. Well, down the road was a chicken farmer that had 4 barns of chickens. Each barn had 1.5 million chickens in it. So I asked, well, I grew up on a wheat farm, not on a turkey farm or anything. I said, well, what does a chicken farmer do with all that blood? He says, well, feeds it to the chickens, helps them lay better eggs. And in my mind, I'm thinking, is that a hog egg or is that a chicken egg? Well, what are we looking at here? I mean, you are what you eat. The egg's going to be what they fed it. And, well, yeah, so I got quite an education out there. Well, I just had another patient came in, and I said, well, where do you work? He said, I work at the protein factory. Down the road was a protein factory. It always had a big smokestack, a lot of steam coming out of it. I said, oh, so what do you do at the protein factory? He says, we get all the hog bones from your hog factory in town, and we take those bones and we put them in big boilers, big, like room-sized boilers, and we boil it for 4 hours. All the fat and so forth comes to the top. I said, well, what do you do with that? He says, well, we put it in cans, and we sell it to the restaurants as soup base. I'm thinking, oh, where did I eat soup last? I said, so you make soup base? He says, well, that's just the side product. Oh, I said, well, what do you do with the rest of it? He says, well, the rest of it in there, we make seasonings out of it. And I'm thinking, seasonings? What do you mean seasonings? He says, oh, it makes everything taste really good. I said, well, what would your seasonings be called? He says, well, natural flavors. I said, natural flavors? I said, the other day I went to the supermarket and I bought a bag of dried apricots. And it said they'd been sulfured and it said it had natural flavors. I said, you suppose that could be some of your hog bones? He says, we make an awful lot of it. Like, yeah. I'm like, oh boy. Well, anyway, there's a lot of this goes on in mixing animal products into every other thing, so you have to figure out where they show up. And okay, well, we got to talk about things that help fix this. What do you do if you know all these extra hormones? Well, phytoestrogens block receptors from being overstimulated by these hormones, by estradiol and others. And so things like soy and flax and turmeric, and people say, wait, not soy. Flax has 50% more of these phytoestrogens than does soy, but it doesn't get a lot of bad press. Why? Because they don't make milk out of it. You see, soy is sort of hard on the animal industry, especially dairy and even meat with its meat analogs, and so soy gets a lot of bad press, but it's not true press. It's just that, because if flax was being made into flax burgers and flax milk, then it would get a bad press. But they don't worry about it because it doesn't get it doesn't cause that kind of, competition for that industry. So soy helps lower the risk of breast cancer, endometrial cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer, and so it's very beneficial. It's very anti-inflammatory. You don't want genetically modified, and I'll show you what happens when you eat genetically modified. That's not real good, but it counteracts these hormones that you don't want that cause cancer. Well, it's not just soy, though. So do some vegetables, the cruciferous vegetables. It helps to settle your hormones. So some of you who might be thinking about menopause, and well, you're getting a lot of tips on how to balance hormones here, because the cruciferous vegetables make it so you urinate out more estradiol. You get rid of it. It helps clear your body of it. So that's a benefit. Another thing that helps is exercise. People who exercise end up clearing out more hormones. And being fit is very important for surviving cancer or avoiding cancer. People who have a high level of fitness cut their risk of dying of cancer by over 50%. So activity is important. I mean, if you keep wiggling, they won't put you in a box. When I was a medical student, they used to like to stand us all up. And it's kind of like being in the military. Well, anyway, stand us all up, bring in a patient, and say, okay, Dr. Clark, come examine this patient's leg and tell us what you think they have. And so this patient raised their pant leg up, and I looked at the leg, and I said, well, on the leg there was a raised purple area about 3 centimeters long and a centimeter wide, and kind of, purple. And I looked at that, almost looked like a caterpillar under the skin, and I said, well, could the patient have Kaposi sarcoma? And the attending physician says, well, yes, very good. And why do you think they have Kaposi sarcoma? Well, Kaposi sarcoma is usually associated with AIDS. You wipe out your immune system with the AIDS virus, and then you're immunosuppressed, and then this other cancer, Kaposi sarcoma, comes up from a second virus. And so I said, is the patient HIV positive? And the doctor says, well, no, but that's a good guess. In fact, that would be the number one reason why most people would get Kaposi sarcoma. But no, this patient has had a kidney transplant, and because they've had a kidney transplant, they're on immunosuppressive drugs, and so that's why this secondary cancer, this opportunistic cancer has come in. Wow, got me thinking. And I think I asked, I said, so anything that suppresses the immune system can leave you open for cancer? Yes. Anything that wipes out your immune system can leave you open for cancer. And why is that? Well, I've kind of given you a tip here, but you see, when we go to meatpacking plants and we test the blood of the meat packers there, the abattoir or the slaughterhouse, we discover that their blood shows evidence of having been exposed to lots of viruses, some of which cross species, many of which cross species. And so these guys that work at slaughter plants have a lot higher risk for lung, mouth, throat, colon, bladder, and kidney cancer. The guys that work in your local supermarket behind the meat counter, running big chunks of meat through a saw and cutting it up and putting it into packages for people, the saw gets the blood in the air, they breathe in the blood, it causes more lung cancer, more lymphoma, cancer of lymph nodes, and leukemia, cancer of the blood. It's because the viruses are in the blood. Have you ever heard it said that the life is in the blood and that we shouldn't take the blood? We could also say maybe the death is in the blood and causing troubles. Yes, and so, well, just to illustrate here, I mean, these species crossing viruses. A group down in California decided to study breast cancer. They did breast biopsies on breast cancer and also tested women who had no breast cancer. They discovered that women who had breast cancer had a much higher incidence, 3 times the incidence of infection with one of these viruses, a bovine leukemia virus, which causes breast cancer. Does it make any sense that if I'm consuming the product from an animal's breast, I might get a breast disease? Yeah, species crossing viruses. And so animal products, and of course meat, are going to have these viruses which affect whether or not you get these cancers. Excuse me. All right, so, and if you look around the world, here's a map comparing. On one side we have milk consumption, on the other side we have breast cancer, and it's the maps line up pretty similar. Okay, what wipes out your immune system? Well, one big thing is sugar. Here we have a bunch of cancers that increase with use of sugar. Breast cancer, prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, and the graphs go on there. And then we have melanoma and pancreatic cancer. You see, when your immune system gets wiped out, and sugar likes, cancer likes sugar. It feeds the sugar. And I mean, the sugar feeds the cancer. And so you end up with a lot faster growing cancer. If you're eating anything that would give a diabetic a high blood sugar, it's probably going to increase your risk of cancer. Diabetics definitely have a higher risk of cancer as well. So, white rice, white pasta, white bread, corn, a lot of boxed cereals are highly processed, and you end up with a higher risk of cancer. So, you want to go with whole grains. You want to go with things that have lots of fiber, things that are high in minerals, things that are high in vitamins. You see, when you eat whole grains, then your risk of most cancers go down compared to processed grains, especially colorectal, gastric, pancreatic, your digestive cancers, digestive tract cancers. Each 30 grams a day intake of whole grains in one study was associated with a 7% lower risk of cancer mortality. We're not used to using whole grains. A lot of people are using the processed grains. And it's one of the biggest reasons why we have lots of diabetes, lots of cancer, lots of problems. Because you're eating food that doesn't have nutrition. It's really going to make you malnourished, and you're going to end up being hungry for more of it. What about sugar in drinks, carbonated beverages, or even juices? It's interesting that using juices or carbonated beverages quadruple your risk of stomach cancer. And you wonder why sometimes people think that they should juice for getting rid of cancer. It's not really that effective. It's better to use herbal teas. That way you know what you're getting for sure without all the sugar. All right, let's talk a little bit more about mechanisms of cancer. Cancer is just cells, normal cells in your body that got their brains changed, their plan changed, their program changed. It's like the DNA in your body is like a computer program. What happens is the computer program gets changed. Either a virus gets into your DNA and changes it, or a toxin gets into your DNA and changes it. Something changed it, or radiation or something like that. And when the DNA gets changed, it codes for something different than a normal cell, and the cell turns into cancer. And then it grows, and it can grow out of control, and it doesn't stop, and we call that cancer. So anything that changes the DNA, so certain toxins. And from meat, what happens is when people eat meat, it's very hard to digest. If you look at an animal that we suspect is supposed to be eating meat, like mountain lions around here, they have 10 times the amount of acid in their stomachs that a human being does. Because it takes a lot more acid to unwind all the protein associated with animal muscles. That's what you're eating when you eat meat. It's just the muscles off some animal. And in the process of trying to unwind all those muscle fibers, the proteins get changed into toxic chemicals, N-nitrosyl compounds and heterocyclic amines. These things end up getting absorbed into your intestinal walls. As they go through your that's the way most of your food is. It gets absorbed through your intestinal walls. But as it goes through your intestinal wall, these toxic compounds cause DNA changes in the cells lining your intestines. And then you start developing cancer. You get a polyp, and then you get a cancer that blocks your colon. And then you get a colostomy, and it goes downhill from there. And so what you want to do is avoid these proteins that you don't have the right digestive system to manage. What do I do to counteract it, though, in the meantime? Well, there's good food to counteract it. I keep throwing in slides of good food. You see, pineapple stops the formation of those heterocyclic amines and N-nitrosyl compounds. So there you go. Eat a beefsteak and then eat a pineapple. Well, I don't know what the comparison is, but anyway, the good stuff is in the fruits and vegetables, right? That's the antidote. Avoid the thing that's causing the problem and eat the good stuff. And there's a lot of good things in pineapple that are healthy, vitamin C and so forth. Now, pesticides and herbicides. Better living through chemistry, right? So when I was in Iowa, I enjoyed going out on the farms with the farmers and talking with them and looking what they're doing. And one time I went to a local farm and the farmer was out there and he says, yeah, you want to ride around with me on the tractor? I'm planting corn. And we were planting corn right in the stalks of the last year's soybeans. I said, don't you till in the soybean? Oh no, we do no-till. Well, what's no-till? He says, oh, we just plant it and then we spray and we spray and we spray and everything grows and then next year after we harvest the corn, we'll just plant the soybeans amongst the corn stalks and we'll spray and we'll spray. And I'm like, wow, okay, better living through chemistry. And so pesticides and herbicides, and these animals are out there in that. And when the animals eat that feed, well, a lot of animals biomagnify or concentrate what they eat. Like, for example, some studies show as much as 240 times. So if they eat corn that has some Roundup in it, they're going to concentrate that Roundup 240 times. That's going to be in the meat. And so you thought strawberries were bad as far as the dirty dozen? I mean, they don't have 240 times what got sprayed on them like the cows do. And so if we look at animals, beef is the most dangerous food you can buy in the supermarket for herbicide contamination, and it is third in insecticide contamination. These animal products are highly concentrated in anything that was put on their feed, that was sprayed in their environment, that was put into what they will be in contact with. Now, but we have some solutions. These toxins that would bind to DNA, you eat cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts, they actually have phytochemicals that block the toxins from binding to the DNA. How's that for sophisticated? All the way down at the molecular level. That's incredible. So you eat a lot more of these, and they also help to cleanse your liver. Your liver is where all these toxins are going to end up, because that's your filter in your body. That and the kidneys, but you need to clean your filter once in a while. And so if we have people with liver problems and so forth, then we send them to eat more cruciferous vegetables. This is one of the good things about fresh fruits and vegetables. They help solve the problem. So in summary, at least for the animal problems here, meat increases cancer risk through a number of mechanisms. One, it's got all that protein that's of amino acids that aren't helpful. It's got a lot of fat, which increases the risk. It's got hormones that transfer from it to your body. It's got species-crossing viruses and lots of toxins. And so meat turns out to be your number one cause of cancer. But there's other things as well. Let's get back to this DNA damage thing. How do I fix that DNA damage? Well, fortunately, God has put in your body mechanisms by which the body proofreads, so he's got his magnifying glass there, proofreads the DNA. How's that for sophisticated? There is no way that evolution is going to come up with a proofreading mechanism for DNA, much less DNA. I mean, this is an impossibility. It's just, you can't do that. It's like irreducible complexity. How do you have DNA that is making its own proofreader that proofreads itself? That has to be a God thing for sure. When you get down to the complexity of the body and all the interesting aspects of it, it's amazing what you find. But your body, so God put these proofreading mechanisms in place, and your body's always checking. Oh, the virus did that, fix that. Oh, N-nitrosamine did that, okay, fix that. But there's certain things, if you eat them, it stops the proofreading. For example, caffeine. coffee, sport drinks, all this kind of stuff. Caffeine increases your risk of cancer because it stops DNA repair. It makes it so your body isn't doing the proofreading. And there's a number of different cancers that increase with this, but especially cancers of the breast, colon, stomach, kidney, lung, and ovaries. And so you want to make sure you're not stopping the proofreading by some of the things you're eating and consuming. I mean, any source of these caffeines or caffeine-similar, theobromine and methylxanthines, 1/2 ounce of chocolate, for example, has caffeine in it and theobromine. It doubles the risk of prostate cancer. And so chocolate is also going to be part of that picture. Now I want to throw up a slide, kind of throw in a monkey wrench here. This was an interesting slide. So a lady who worked at the NIH. Now what's the NIH? National Institute of Health. It's a big research foundation and laboratory in the United States where a lot of funding goes, and they look at all the different causes of diseases. And well, this lady worked there for 25 years, and she experienced a lot of interesting pressures from the outside on what her research should and shouldn't be, and so as she was leaving the NIH, she decided to write it all up into a big article and publish it on all the reasons that she saw why cancer was increasing, why other diseases were increasing, and she attributed it all to all the fancy drugs that got pushed through under different guises and vaccinations. And she published this article back in 2020. And she pointed out here that like in 1900, only 5% of death certificates listed cancer. And now we have 33% of women, about a third of women and half of men having some kind of cancer by the time they die. And she attributed it all to these wonder drugs and fancy medical interventions, vaccines. And she gave good evidence in her article, very long article, a lot of interesting detail. So we haven't done ourselves any good by better living through chemistry motto, right? We've done ourselves a lot of damage. What we really want to do is feed ourselves naturally and treat ourselves naturally when we get a problem. And you might be saying, yeah, but what about wonder drugs like penicillin? When you have, what's that? Garlic, yeah, garlic. And that garlic helps with social distancing too, doesn't it? Yeah, all right. But penicillin, if you've been on penicillin for a total cumulative lifetime dose of 6 weeks, your risk of cancer goes up 40%. Penicillin is a mold. It causes cancer. It just doesn't do it the day you take it. Oh, it fixed my sore throat. It fixed my pneumonia. But she's pointing out that, yeah, we have high risks of cancers from taking all these wonder drugs. All right, so what can I do to stimulate DNA repair? Well, back to good food. Kiwi has been shown to be a great booster for antioxidants and protect against DNA damage and stimulate DNA repair. So that's a good food and high in vitamin C. Now, another thing that increases cancer is overeating. My wife just got back from a women's retreat. She says 95% of the women there were quite overweight. Well, that doesn't help because, wow, this overeating bit doubles your risk of cancer. And it's like when you eat extra food, it creates more free radicals. It produces more products of metabolism that are not going to help your system. It also makes your body go into growth mode. And so more growth hormones are produced. And the growth hormones make it so cancer grows more. And on the other hand, eating less food, caloric restriction, doesn't mean you have to eat less volume. You choose foods with better calorie profile. I mean, it's the difference between eating a head of lettuce and eating a Snickers bar. Which one has more calories? Well, the Snickers bar. Which one has more nutrition? Well, the lettuce. And so the lettuce would be lower calories, therefore caloric restriction. So when you eat less food, at least calories, less calorie-dense foods, your body's better able to repair DNA, and it reduces DNA damage. And the people who've taught us the most about this are the Okinawans. The Okinawans eat 40% fewer calories than most Westerners, and they have 80% fewer breast and prostate cancers, 50% fewer ovarian and colon cancers. A lot less cancer when eating a lot less food. You know, in this day and age, we've come to be able to eat lots and lots of food. But who knows, you know, time may come when that's going to be harder to pull off just due to economics and who knows. Well, one way to eat less food is to eat only 2 meals a day instead of 3. And studies show that compared to 2 meals a day, eating 3 meals a day increases the risk of cancer 70%, 4 meals a day 90%, and then you start adding snack times or meals on top of that, and each meal you add to that increases the risk of colon cancer another 60%. But you might be saying, but my doctor told me I was supposed to eat 8 little tiny meals all day for my diabetes or my weight loss or my... Well, the research doesn't show that that is a good idea. The research shows that that increases your risk of cancer dramatically. And so lowering the risk is the name of the game here. And one of the best things you can do to boost your immune system is eat nutritionally dense foods. Nutritionally dense foods are usually foods that are closest to the garden. And so fruits and vegetables, they invigorate your immune system for fighting cancer. And studies have shown this. I mean, the more fruits and vegetables you eat, the lower the risk of cancer. Cancer risk, and as your grams of fruits and vegetables go up to about 400 grams a day, cancer incidence goes down. Well, what kind of diet have we been talking about? Isn't it the Bible diet, the original diet, the Genesis diet? Yes, this is the diet from back there in Eden, nuts and seeds and fruits and grains and vegetables and so forth. And so if we were eating that kind of diet, maybe we'd live as long as Adam, huh? Well, he lived to 930 years. Quite a record. Well, let's talk about other things than diet. Let's talk about environment. In the modern time, we've come to live indoors and to ride in our cars, where it's basically indoors. We have our glass that blocks the sun so we don't get too hot in our cars. We go to work and we go indoors. And we hide from the sun all day like mushrooms. And the end result is we don't get enough vitamin D, we don't get enough melatonin, we don't get enough all kinds of things. Well, they did a study on rats. They gave them something that would cause cancer, and then they split them in 2 groups. One group was put outdoors. One group was kept indoors. Guess which group of rats cancer grew the most? The indoor rats' cancer grew twice as big in the same amount of time. And so being indoors all the time is not where we were meant to be. Didn't God plant us all in a garden in Eden? And so outdoors is the place to be. And in fact, I've had some people, they'll tell me all about their environment, and I say, you got cancer and you live in this house that sounds moldy. They say, what do we do? I says, well, go down to the big box store, buy yourself a tent, pitch it in the backyard, and move into the backyard in your tent. And then stay outside of the tent as much as possible too. And that would make them much more healthy. Now, what's that? You ever heard the slogan, burn the bra? This study was very interesting. Women who do not wear bras had half the risk of breast cancer compared with bra users. A couple of weeks ago, I was giving this talk, and the lady said, yeah. She says, bras are for men, not for women. And it's true. I mean, yeah, right. Not that the men wear the bras. Right, these days. All right, sunlight. Sunlight definitely helps vitamin D. It boosts the vitamin D. But now we're starting to wonder if that's really that important. Not that the vitamin D levels don't correlate with good health, but really the vitamin D levels really correlate with having gotten sun. They're a marker for the fact that you were out in the sun. And in fact, the UVB necessary to raise vitamin D may not be that healthy as the infrared. When you get the infrared, when you can feel the heat, then you are boosting your melatonin. And it's not just your melatonin from your pineal gland in the middle of the night, it's melatonin within the mitochondria, the very organelles of your cells. And when that melatonin is boosted in your cells, it gets rid of the reactive oxygen species, the free radicals, the oxidants, the bad things that cause cancer. And so sunlight penetrates when you're out in the sun. It penetrates as much as, 9 centimeters. And this makes it so that all the cells within that range go up in melatonin and lowers their risk of cancer because melatonin reduces cancer risk. Now, so a lot of people aren't out there in the sunlight. They come out at night. Some people are never out in broad daylight. And if you're out at night under artificial lights, as we are tonight, especially late at night, you end up blocking your body's ability to produce melatonin. You get low on melatonin, and your cancer risk goes up. People who work at night have higher risks of cancer because their melatonin never rises as it should in the night. And so lights, especially lights that are blue lights, fluorescent lights, LED lights, computer screens, iPads, iPhones, all these kind of things. The blue lights wipe out your melatonin and give you a higher risk of cancer. Now I want to talk about exposure to mold in your environment. I came home to my parental home after being gone for a few years, and I sniffed around and said, "You got mold in the basement." Well, my mom had just had uterine cancer. My stepdad had had prostate problems. And lo and behold, there's mold in the home. So, major remodeling project, remove the whole wall, fix the roof, vent the basement, all kinds of things, and get rid of the mold problem. But mold is a big problem. If you're in an area where there's been mold, it's hard to avoid the health effects of that mold. And so it increases your risk of cancer. A lot of people are thinking, yeah, but my house is perfectly clean. A lot of people don't realize that their food is filled with mold. Fermented foods, things like alcoholic beverages, vinegar, cheese, sour cream, wine, yogurt, soy sauce, sauerkraut, salami, chocolate, vanilla, brown rice syrup, nutritional yeast, all sources of toxins from fungi, which mold are and yeast is and mushrooms are, that cause cancer. And so it comes in our food. Much better to eat fresh food that hasn't been fermented or had something else eating on it before you eat on it. For example, soy. Soy, you can eat tofu, which is not fermented. You can eat soy milk, which is not fermented. You can eat soybeans, which are not fermented. That's good. But if you start eating fermented soy, like soy sauce, miso, tempeh, it increases your risk of cancer by 58%. The fermented foods increase cancer. And it's a number of reasons. As soon as something starts fermenting, a lot of strange pathogens converge upon it, the least of which is not viruses. During COVID, or a little before COVID, with all the PCR technology, a bunch of Koreans decided to put some of their kimchi in the PCR machine. They're using PCR to diagnose COVID. Well, they put their kimchi in there, which is rotten cabbage, and they discovered in their little sample of kimchi 69,000 viral DNA particles that they hadn't realized were in there. In other words, the viruses had taken over their cabbage by the thousands. And so when you rot something, it's taken over by stuff that we hadn't even realized till we got PCR technology. And those viruses can, some of them coded for antibiotic resistance, some of them for things that could lead to cancer and so forth. Now, everything you buy in the store comes in plastic. Peanut butter in a plastic jar, milk in a plastic jug, juice in a plastic carton. And we got cereal in a plastic bag, and meat on a plastic card, luncheon meats. And everything's in plastic. And the people making those plastics have 5 times the risk of cancer. What's that mean for us that's eating all that stuff? And then you buy your oil in a plastic bottle, and the bottle's made out of oil, really. And so all that, the bottle puts its products into the oil. You end up, when you use bottled oil, it comes in a plastic jug. You're going to be getting plastic in your food. You're eating your margarine in a plastic tub, and you're getting, it's got BPA and all these kind of things. And so our modern society has done some strange things to us that's very dangerous. And then came GMO and genetically modified foods. This is a busy slide, but I'll just explain it here. Up in the upper left-hand corner, we have a normal kidney from a normal rat. The next kidney, the rat got fed only 11% of its diet as genetically modified corn. Not 100% of its diet as corn that was genetically modified, just 11%. And the kidney degenerated and starts looking bad. Then in the next slide, they gave the rat not only genetically modified corn, but the Roundup in water, the amount of Roundup allowed in most cities in the water system. Parts per billion, 0.1 parts per billion. And then the kidney totally doesn't look like a kidney at all. The fourth one is a kidney from a rat that just got Roundup water. Down below we have the first rat's got genetically modified corn, the second one's got the corn in the Roundup water, and the third one's got, all of them have all these tumors. There's a 2-year study on rats, and all the rats got cancer from these things. And so genetically modified foods are very dangerous. And so that's why we try to make sure we avoid genetically modified foods. All right. Now, one of the things we can do to help cleanse our bodies is drink more good, pure water. When we drink pure water, it helps us to urinate out more toxins. But also, you drink more water, you will sweat out more toxins. Unlike your urine, it gets more clean and clear and dilute with drinking more water. Your sweat actually gets more concentrated with getting rid of toxins the more you drink. And so drinking lots of water is part of the solution. Now what's this gentleman got in his hands? A flip phone. Last generation phones, right? Now we have our smartphones. But when you put an electronic device up to your head, it puts a lot of radiation into your brain. In fact, I had a gentleman in one of my talks. He says, yeah, during my military tenure up in Alaska, one of our jobs was to evaluate cell phones. He said we put a cell phone to somebody's head for 20 minutes, and the temperature of their brain went up by 0.5 degree. Now realize your brain takes a large percentage of the blood in your body, pumping through it, cooling it, constantly being cooled with the blood. At least it's going to be the same temperature, and it went up by 0.5 degree with all that blood pumping through it. And so if you look at a thermogram of somebody's brain when they put the cell phone to their head, the whole head lights up with a bright red halo of energy. And so people get on these phones, more acoustic neuromas, that's cancer of the ear, inner ear. A few years ago we were touring and I had 3 people come up to me and ask me, how do I treat this? I've got acoustic neuroma from my cell phone. Gliomas, astrocytomas, increasing with putting these cell phones to your head. What do? I got to communicate. Well, use hands-free, use a headset. What's that, a Bluetooth? Wired headset or an air headset with the tubes that go up to your head from the unit down below. Yeah. And then what do we do with 5G? All kinds of things. Now, another one that's interesting is watching TV. Sitting there in front of the television for 1 hour increases your risk of cancer by 9%. We're talking every day for an hour. 2 hours, 18%. 3 hours, for every hour it increases by 9%. 10 hours, 90%. And so it has to do with a lot of things. You're getting a lot of blue light, you're getting a lot of radiation, you're getting a lot of stress and trauma and, drama. And just realize that. And these two big studies, same conclusion. Interesting. But it's fascinating. If you take a whole crowd of people that have all these risk factors I've been talking about, and one group has stress and the other group doesn't have stress, the stressed out people have 40% higher death rate from cancer. It's the mind-body connection. Stress is definitely a big player in whether or not you get cancer. In fact, when I was at Eden Valley and we had all these cancer patients coming, I realized that they were stressed out of their minds. I thought, well, it's because they have cancer. But, type A personalities have a lot more cancer than type B personalities. You know what type A personalities are? The people that are driven, like to do a lot of things, like to get things done fast. They're the ones that give type B personalities stress. Anyway, the type A personalities will probably be more likely to get cancer. Studies show they do. And the type B personalities are more likely to get diabetes. So we'd have our diabetics come to Eden Valley. And, what's for lunch? And it's great. The cancer patients, how do you know that's going to help me? Well, what are you going to give me for, treatment today? And did I get enough treatment or not? So I started a stress management workshop. We put one of the nurses to work just doing nothing but stress management workshop for a cancer patient because stress is a killer. And they said that was one of their favorite things at the Institute was their stress management time. Peace of mind makes the body healthy, but jealousy is like a cancer. Proverbs 14:30, at least in today's English version. Okay, well, now, speaking of stress and a Bible text, they've studied spirituality and its effect on whether you have cancer or not. And a good spiritual health increases life expectancy, it boosts the immune system, and helps you fight cancer. And there's a lot of aspects to this. And another aspect is that when we can turn our stress over to God, then we can just relax and sit back and say, no matter what happens, it's in His hands. And that's the best way to do it. Well, I should read that text while we're here. Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Isn't that a great promise? All right, an attitude of gratitude. When we do get rest from Him, then we're very grateful. And people who are grateful survive cancer better, they live longer. I do a whole talk on gratitude. You can look it up on our website. I'll show you what our website is down here toward the end. But gratitude is an important part of survival. Another thing that's helpful is being of benefit to others. And I can't tell you how many patients I've told about this, because this is key. If you're just living for yourself, worried about yourself, thinking about yourself, you probably will get sick. But if you think about others, worry about others, help others, then you stay well. In fact, being helpful and supportive to your friends, neighbors, relatives, and a spouse significantly improves your survival odds, according to the research. Just receiving support really has no benefit on longevity or mortality. And so, those that live to give, it is more blessed to give than to receive. It really is. And sometimes you meet somebody that you know that if you ask them how they're doing, you'll get the organ recital. You know what the organ recital is, right? Oh, my heart and my lungs and different organs and what problems they're having and yeah, looking for sympathy and yeah, it's good to sympathize, but if they could think about something positive and get away from that. You know, the time is coming when we won't have to worry about cancer, right? And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. And there was no more sea, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. Amen. Looking forward to that time. Yeah. Well, let's call it doing it well. What do we do to do it well? Just to summarize, take advantage of all the benefits in foods as grown. Don't let anybody process it and take away its nutrients. Avoid animal products with their high protein and fat and viruses and toxins and growth hormones. Avoid foods and substances that damage DNA and suppress the immune system, like sugar, animal products, tobacco, alcohol, caffeine, heavy metals, and pesticides. Choose a lifestyle and diet which expels toxins from your body, invigorates your immune system, and keeps you at peak physical, mental, and spiritual performance. Exercise in the open air and sunshine. Drink plenty of pure water. Rest in bed at night and in the love and providence of God. And if you go to my website, you'll see you can download this book, or you can go to on the right, left-hand column there, you'll see a button for written materials. The website is northernlightshealtheducation.com, and everything I do, I try to put in there both in video form and in written form. It's a work in progress. Languages. We haven't got French on there yet, but we've got the book totally translated into Portuguese, 90% into Spanish. We got Dutch started and a bunch of other languages started, but anyway, you can go there, you can download handouts, print them out or read them online, you can watch videos. We got 3 different categories of videos. We got ones done in the studio, got ones done live like this, and then we got ones that are on Zoom. And we cover probably 50, 60 topics, different diseases, causes, things to do to fix them. All right, very good. Well, we got time for questions? All right, question.